So good morning, everyone. From my side, my name is Carlos Hertel. I'm the chairman for Science Business, and I'm having the pleasure and the privilege to moderate the next session, which is entitled Back to Basics, and is meant to deal with how to invigorate the science to business R&D partnership model. Now, that is, like some of the stuff we discussed yesterday, is a perennial theme that maybe stands at the beginning of all of this science to business paradigm, and is going to keep us busy, I guess, for years to come, hopefully making progress, at least to some extent. But it's always good to go back and say, where do we stand, what does work and what doesn't? In a sense, like the term stock take has become popular. So let's have a European stock take on where we stand in terms of R&D partnerships, where partnership means between academia or academic institutions, public research organizations included, and the private sector, which could be small companies, it could be startups, but it, of course, can also be, in many cases, will be large industrial companies or large corporates. We do have a panel of distinguished speakers. I hope we have them all in-house today, which I may please ask to come on stage is Annika Borgenstam, who is the Vice Rector for Research at KTH, so the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. We have Martin Vetterli, President of the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne, so the EPFL in Switzerland. With Matthias Rauch, who is the Chief Representative for the EU at Fraunhofer. And then we also have Kaspar Garros, who is the Head of Public-Private Partnerships in Philips. So please get on stage. Good to see you all here. I'm going to take a seat somewhere here at the far end. And I want to dive right in with a question to someone, if you will, who represents an institution that is, broadly speaking, in the middle between applications and more fundamental research, with the Fraunhofer Society, with a very clear mission of taking new ideas to industry, to the application, and in many cases through partnerships, obviously, co-funded work as well. So Matthias, there is a criticism, and I don't know whether that's actually true or not, you may comment on that, a criticism that what used to be broad-based and had benefits in many applications, kind of like an inclusive way of doing R&D, is becoming ever more siloed, which for an institution like Fraunhofer is bad news, since what you want to do is take your core assets and make sure they're applied more broadly rather than just to one specific thing. I don't know whether it really has changed over the years, but that's a kind of a sentiment. Can you give us your assessment of where we stand in terms of partnerships and potentially more I would say restricted, proprietary ones rather than more broad-based ones, pre-competitive and more inclusive?
Thank you, Carlos. Happy to be on that panel. Good morning, everyone. I think that observation holds true to large parts. We've seen a considerable change over the last 2 or 3 framework programs. Just the recent Horizon 2020 evaluation has explicitly shown that there is an increase in the funding of single beneficiaries. And of course, that takes away some opportunities for organizations like us who believe that a European framework program at the core should support European collaboration, and specifically collaboration between industry and research performing organizations. The reasons for that are probably manifold. One of the reasons is that, the move towards more funding for single beneficiaries, may it be in ERC, may it be in the EIC as well. So what you're left with is the second pillar, where you can do collaborative projects, and I think with the that still goes rather well. But then you have a couple of issues that drive organizations like us more to the sidelines of the framework program. I would name 3. Firstly, it's, and I say that again and again, the question of an objective full cost funding. If you want to have successful research, you have to be aware that research is costly, and then you have to reimburse the costs. Secondly, With the switch to H 2020, the Commission abstained from financing the management of the consortia, and that's exactly what an organization like Fraunhofer is for, to bring all the partners together and to manage those bigger and bigger projects. And thirdly, I'd say, and that's a very broad comment, simplification shouldn't mean that it's more simple for the administrators at the side of the Commission, but it should also be simpler for the beneficiaries. And that's connected with all the red tape issues that we have.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, so you talk a lot to the administration here in Brussels. What is the rationale behind that movement? I mean, is there a logic to it that you can say, like, I understand why they do this, but they're overlooking something? I mean, give me an idea of what you think has driven this change.
That's a very, very personal observation. I believe that the framework program is more and more subjected to a whole set of ever and ever more aims and goals that we have to contribute to and that we have to fulfill with this framework program, and it simply becomes overloaded. You cannot solve all the problems in the world with 95 billion euros, full stop.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Annika, I want to check with you whether the European program is a reflection of what happens nationally as well. To some extent, probably, but I think still national programs are usually a little more flexible. I mean, people are closer together. It's a tight-knit circle of the ones that kind of help shape it and the ones that do receive the money. If you look at the success factors that would form a kind of like the basis for a good public-private partnership and R&D in your home country, Sweden, what is it that we can learn from that? If you see the advantages over the complexity of the European programs.
Yeah, I think it is actually the flexibility and that it's less bureaucratic, because when you go in, for instance, I have a long experience in research centers collaborating with a lot of companies, and for the national funding it is much more flexible and you can choose in what direction you go along the way. So, and then you can feel confident that if we find something we can change direction, and that is not a problem. And I think for companies that is also then feeling a bit more secure that if they go into it, they can actually get what they want. So I think that is something to learn. And one feeling here is also that the national funding agency, they trust the beneficiaries a bit more, that they will do something that is good. But then I also think that it's there are other issues as well, and that, for instance, come to the size of projects, that if they become very, very large and complex, they will be less flexible. So perhaps it's not necessary that they need to be so large, that it can be good also with smaller projects, and then that it's easier for different types of companies, but still in the same sector, to work together. I think that is also something that is useful. But then also like the administrative burden, that I think that is also something that scares the companies, that it is too time consuming.
Trust is a key point, of course, and large bureaucracies, there's some logic to it, in that if you have to manage compliance, you're getting very bureaucratic. Lots of checks and lots of process steps and many independent individuals involved in it to make sure nothing ever is, say, illegitimately spent, the money. In national programs, that is less of a problem, apparently. But, I mean, one thing is it's a smaller group. Depending, if the country is very large, you have a similar problem. If the country is smaller, it might be a little easier. But that lack of trust, potentially, is the money flowing to the right places. How can we instill that sense of trust in such something as massive as a European framework program? So Fundamentally, I'm saying is, I think the bureaucracy is there for a reason. Can we get rid of it without building different structures, different models of collaboration that replace some of the compliance check marks? Do you see a way of doing that? Or would you recommend the Commission, if I may say so?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, I think that sometimes we check things that perhaps is not that important. That is things that are easy to check, while we are not so perhaps interested in what really comes out of it. And of course, it's much easier to do that than to see what are the results. Well, of course, that's very tricky.
Yeah.
But still, still a problem.
Which brings me to Martin and the question. I mean, EPFL has many collaborations like other large universities. I mean, focused on technology and focused on engineering disciplines, but also natural sciences, of course. You work with small companies, work with larger companies. And fundamentally, one might ask, well, what role does the state even have in all of this? And should it have a role? Of both the national government, in your case Switzerland, as well as the European Union. So what is fundamentally, my question is, fundamentally the logic of even involving governments in this process of research collaboration between academia and RTOs and the private sector?
Interesting question. Well, it's obvious that basic research is funded by the government. Nobody will pay for basic research, right? It's a luxury like culture, but it's a great luxury that we should maintain. And there, I mean, just before I come to your question, I would like to point out that the most successful program in the framework program is the ERC. Okay, the ERC is absolutely outstanding in terms of quality, in terms of selecting the right people, in giving a lot of freedom. I don't remember much administration because it's freewheeling research, okay? And so the ERC absolutely has to be protected in the next framework program. I'm sorry to insist very boldly here. The networking projects, as a researcher, I've been trying to avoid them because they are so heavy, so bureaucratic, so, you need network with this and that, and then you need to show up in Brussels, to some preset meeting, blah, blah, blah. What I remember is that, by the time we had signed the IP agreement with all the partners, the project was actually finished, right? So much for being innovative and protecting IP. So I think there is a real question there, is it worth creating these monsters with lots of constraints? You have to answer, 17 different KPIs or whatever, and it becomes so heavy. I mean, it's great because you meet a lot of people, but I'm not sure it's the best invested money in terms of, really getting stuff out. In terms of working with companies, I think it's a question of culture. You want your organization to be as flexible as possible, as open as possible, as transparent as possible. And then, some people like to work with companies, some people like to have spin-outs and be involved in startups and so on, and some other people, prefer proving theorems, right? And you need both, right? There is no silver bullet. And I think the culture, at least in an institute of technology like KTH or EPFL, is such that people have a lot of interactions, right? And then comes a question of IP. I think that's always a touchy one. Also the question when you have several companies interested in one topic, how do you organize, a center or, a center of excellence so that there is a pre-competitive space where companies feel at ease to actually work on rather basic things without then, getting into fights over the IP and so on. All of this can be solved. But again, there is not one size fits all. I think the key is to be very flexible and to use the fact that in Europe we have generous public funding to do the basic research and therefore to hand over to society the fruits of our research.
Yeah, I think we probably all agree on the fundamental research side. There would be no funder at all. I mean, well, there's some philanthropy that puts money into this. The question remains on the side of applied research. What would we expect governments to do? You might say governments want to define directions and say, like, I have an R&D program in this because I think it's critical. Or they may say, like, well, it's all open call, right? I've helped you risk retire. If companies find it too expensive to spend the money on something that's highly unlikely to maybe succeed, right? I'm going to help you take it over the hurdle in some sense. But I think it's worth wondering, what exactly do we want governments to do with the money that they do spend in research that is towards applications and higher TRL levels? So if you as a university president can like, well, that's what I would want this money for, and then we can ask, is that happening today, or is it just, is the money going elsewhere?
Two answers. I mean, I used to be at the National Science Foundation funding, research, and the question always came up, what is basic, what is applied research? There is no difference. There is good research and bad research. Okay? You can do very bad fundamental research and you can do outstanding applied research. So only quality matters, right? And the distance between doing something fundamental and having impact, depending on the field, when you are doing it and so on, can be very short or very long, right? mRNA was mentioned a number of times, right? It took a long time, but it was there when it was needed, right? In the IT industry, you look at large language models, it took a very, very, very long time, right? About 40, 50 years. And then all of a sudden it was a revolution, right? So, to try to fit this in an Excel table is a very bad idea, okay? So you should only look for quality for the right people with the right attitude.
Thank you. Yeah, the LLM story is an interesting one in that the whole neural network thing was so discredited over decades, in a sense, that it was a surprise to many people it ever made it back, and it came back with a roar, right? Which kind of almost unexpected, at least to the outside observers. Maybe the insiders always felt it had a huge potential, but there was also an element of surprise in it as well. And it speaks to some of the things earlier. You do something, you bring it to a certain point, but the time isn't ready for it to adopt, and that moment can come any moment.
If I may, just 30 seconds. I mean, the Europeans should recognize when they have nuggets, right?
Yeah.
And so Europe has DeepL. DeepL is a large language model. It's the most successful translation engine, right? But of course, they're not as glitzy as Sam Altman and OpenAI, right? DeepMind is a European AI company, right? Sold for a pittance to Google. So the Europeans should cherish the nuggets they have, right? Because fundamental research is very good, applied research is very good, but then scale-up funding is actually not present enough in Europe.
Yeah. Thank you. Which brings me to the experience of and around Philips in the Eindhoven area. And Caspar, you have been working with many R&D parties and universities and RTOs. And I think I've always looked at Eindhoven as one of these hotbeds in some sense, where things come together. Distances are short, people know each other. The old days of the open R&D campus, in a sense, the innovation campus. Your learnings from that history of what works when it comes to translating technologies from the lab to life somehow in these partnerships, and where does it fail when it fails?
Okay, this is all about ecosystem and collaboration. But let me get back to this morning, if I may. So it was being remembered this morning that FP1 was being founded basically by the Commission and 10 companies, and Philips was one of them. I just, if I may, Carlos, remind, and also the speakers here, that academia and research institutes have been hugely successful in all the framework programs, but FP1 was meant for competitiveness, and 100% of the funding went to companies. So that has changed over time. And that's good, because it's a collaboration that counts between universities, research institutes, large companies, small companies, and what have you. The point I just want to make before going to your question, if we now look to the current landscape, and if we look to the positions of large companies, and also Richard was mentioning that, we see some deterioration. We see currently that in the EU, almost 60% of research innovation is being invested by companies, the private sector, 60%. But the share of private sector in Horizon Europe is just 28%. So there's a bit of a discrepancy. If I may, to your question on collaboration, and Matthias, thank you very much. This is not the main worry. The main worry is that the Horizon Europe program is the general program is indeed in Pillar 2 becoming quite general. The chances of success for business are becoming less and less. Sometimes we're even called into a project at the very end because then a company is needed. And I'm not talking about the first and third pillar, but the second pillar, global competitiveness. But that's not what we would like to do. We would like to be there from the outset. And that's what we did in the past. So that's a plea to you as well to think about better company and private representation for the impact. Because of the collaboration, the ecosystem we should together work on. And secondly, what is important is that you see a tendency towards the joint undertakings. We are very successful in IHI, the Innovative Health Initiative, but also in KDT, which is now CHIPS joint undertaking. So I see a bit of a tendency within companies to look more, indeed, it's called applied research here, into joint undertakings, and that would be a pity, because we also need, let's say, the general cooperation in Horizon Europe. So that's on the European landscape, Carlos, indeed. In the Eindhoven region itself, we have an own cluster which is hugely successful, but I would say that's then regional, but it goes hand in hand, right? Sometimes we want to act on the European level because of the partners, and sometimes we want to do it regionally, like you were saying about Sweden as well. Both reinforces each other. My point would be for the next generation, the framework program, like Richard was saying, don't forget the large companies, because it's also a matter of scale, right? In the end, we do innovations together, but they need to be marketed, right? And large companies also offer the opportunity together with SMEs in one consortium with universities, research institutes to do exactly that.
Thank you. I need to check with Florian. I thought I had a clock here, which I don't. You got to give me a sign when we are kind of like just 10 minutes left, because I want to open it up for some questions from the audience as well. Oh, here we go. I was looking at this black screen here. That made no sense at all. Okay, very good. This means 1 hour? No, I'm not quite sure what that one means. Just okay. Thank you. Excellent. Very good. I get back to you, Matthias, and on that question, because Fraunhofer is working with companies of all sizes, but of course historically I think more larger companies were probably more your partners than the many startups that we do see today, or mid-cap companies as well. So I'm quite sure actually how the distribution is, but I think you would appreciate if more of the large industrials would participate. How could we do that at the end of the day? How could we structure the program, or define the calls, or manage the various programs in a way that becomes easier?
I'm not quite sure that we would have to proactively set incentives, particularly for the large corporates, because they're intrinsically motivated to collaborate. They have their reasoning behind this whole setup of collaboration, may it be in the region of Eindhoven, or may it be in general in European programs. But what we shouldn't do is to make the hurdles even larger for them to come in. And that is also something where I would like to complement what you just said. It's basically in the second pillar, RTOs who bring the SMEs to the framework program. The larger corporations do have the means to participate and also the strong will to participate. For the SMEs, they need support, and usually they get their support from research and technology organizations and a close collaboration with research and technology organizations. Empirically, it's proven that organizations like Fraunhofer and other RTOs help SMEs to play their part in European framework programs. And for the mix of customers and collaborators, particularly in the case of Fraunhofer, in terms of numbers, of course, it's SMEs. We have SMEs in the tens of thousands who are our clients. When you look at the turnover that we do with those clients, then of course it's more the large corporates who invest more in their projects, because those projects naturally tend to be bigger. There is also a strong incentive for collaborative research that is, if it's funded at the European level, and it's also empirically proven, at least for the case of Fraunhofer, that those relations tend to continue over the lifetime of the program and beyond. And it's usually those collaborations between industry and research partners that then tend to deepen. And if you have an industry partner in the consortium, that's really the best chance of making it in success in terms of transfer of the results.
So I go to the university representatives again. Money matters, especially if you are not having a product you sell, but fundamentally you're about receiving money and turning it into insights and research results and potentially innovation in cooperation with others. Historically, there had been a bit of a divide between those on the applied side, if you will, or those with products and services they make money off, and then those in the research world. It is getting better, and money may have played a role in building the bridges. But there's probably still something where, if you look at your university, Annika, where you're like, well, there's also matters of attitude and matters of just the lived reality, the practices. If you had it your way, right, where would you invest internally in your organization? You say, like, I want to be better at that. This is what we would need to do to make it better. You may be very perfectly happy with how it is, but I'm quite sure you have your own set of criticisms in how things work today between universities and their industrial partners.
I think it looks quite different in different areas. And then I think that it's very good if we work at lower TRL levels and less close to the innovations, so that we can have, it's still applied research, but it is fundamental because there is no conflict between them. And then from the industrial perspective, we can do what we are best at and what we are supposed to do, and we can publish it openly, but then the industry is really involved and has really shown what they are after, and then they can learn from the best researchers, and then they can apply it in-house. And I think that is sometimes a bit forgotten, that the applied research, you can work very close to the industrial partners, but still on a very fundamental level. But then this is something also that takes time to develop, because you need quite a lot of trust between each other, I would say, because for the industrial partners it's not, perhaps you don't see that this is something that we will gain of during the next years. Perhaps it's like a 10-year perspective. But I think that is very fruitful, and then I think we all, from both sides, can contribute with what we are best at. And if we come a bit too close to each other, then it starts to be a bit more complicated, I would say, and perhaps we are not really doing what we are best at.
Yeah, the clock is ticking down here mercilessly. Now I see that. It jumps from 1 hour to these 3.5 minutes left. But I want to have 2 quick questions. Martin, is that something at EPFL that if you, as the leadership of the organization, talk to the institutes, are you giving the institutes direction in a sense like, this is what we are good at and we know that has worked, this is stay away from that, it leads to trouble, it usually doesn't come out all right? Is there anything that you give as direction or recommendations?
Well, You know, there is these jokes that moving a university is like moving a graveyard. You get very little help from the inside. So if you try to put strategic orientations, professors won't like it, right? Yeah. But every now and then you have to do it, right? If you look at the AI revolution, which is completely transversal, it's obvious that we are recruiting heavily in this, and we are taking resources from other fields just to make sure we are competitive in this, right? The other thing we are doing, which also professors don't like, it's something called mission-oriented research. So everybody talks about climate change. We are an institute of technology, so we need to provide solutions, right? And this is not like, guys, you know, just write a random grant, right? We put money on the table to actually look for solutions to fight climate change, and that's green energy, green storage, stuff like this, carbon capture, and so on. And this is mission-oriented. It can be very fundamental, right? I mean, around carbon capture, catalysis, and so on. You use AI to develop new catalysis and so on. But the goal is very clear, right? And for this, we simply took, you know, money we had, and we said, here is a program. It's mission-oriented. Professors don't like it. The ones that don't want to participate, fine. The ones that want to fight climate change and find solutions, they will participate.
Thank you. 1 minute, I'm going to leave for at least one question from the audience. But a question to you, Casper, in your looking at the history, are we doing better today in terms of collaboration than 5 or 10 years ago? Is it about the same, or is it getting worse?
I would say it's not worse or better, but it has changed, right? So we have come closer together, I would say, companies and RTOs and universities. However, it tends to get closer to the market. Yeah. And I'm pleading again for Pillar 2, global competitiveness, the General Horizon Europe program, still to have sufficient leeway for companies. If I now look to the General Health program and the calls, we're sometimes in, the rate of success is 2 to 5%, which is extremely low, but that may be more doable for a university to submit a proposal and then perhaps reuse the text somewhere else. But for companies, that is very hard to do.
All right, thank you. We have time for one question. 30 seconds. Who has a quick question? And who has a microphone to give it to someone? Is there someone? I'm blinded by the light here. Yeah, here's one. Thank you. Not yet on?
My name is Dan André. I represent the University Alliance Stockholm Trio in Brussels. It includes KTH and Stockholm University and Karolinska Institutet. Coming back to simplification. I mean, if we are going to do it, we need some concrete examples. And collaborative research is not simple. If it was simple, you could cooperate without a program. But we need a program to facilitate the cooperation. So what can you do? Well, one example we have is the COST program. It supports university cooperation. It supports only administrative cost, but not the research. So we could have a simple program in the framework program where we only support the administrative cost and travel, but not the actual research. So universities have to take part with the national programs, and companies to support their own research. That would be a simplification.
Thank you. That's a recommendation. It's not a question, it's a recommendation. It's well taken. Thank you very much. We have to stop because we are also online at the same time while we are in the room, and we have to stay to the schedule. I want to thank my co-panelists a great deal. It was fun having you around here, and there's more time, of course, for discussions. Whoever is interested, the team will still be around. Thank you very much.